LLEWELLYN'i kürsüye davet ediyoruz.
Good morning, everybody. And may I thank Omar Gazal and TURKLAB for inviting me to speak this morning and for hosting a wonderful visit to this splendid city of Istanbul. This morning I'm going to talk about the economic benefits of accreditation. And everything I'm going to talk to you about comes from a study by Marion Frentz and Ray Lambert from Birkbeck College of the University of London, and this study was undertaken in 2013. It has been published, and you can download the report, the full report, from the website which is shown there. You can also download it from the United Kingdom Accreditation Service website, UCAS website. So that's, if you want to know all the detail and the theory behind it, that's where you can get it off the web. So, what I want to do this morning, first of all, I'll talk about the general sort of accreditation scene in the United Kingdom to put the whole thing in context. Then I want to say something about the economic benefits for laboratories. And then I'm going to say just a few words about the wider economic benefits for economies as a whole. And of course, I shall be talking about the UK economy. So, the accreditation scene in the United Kingdom. As some of you at least may know, that the United Kingdom Accreditation Service, UCAS, is the national accreditation body for the UK. Now, UCAS turnover in 2012-2013, that's the year that this study was done, was £21.8 million, which is just a little bit over 30 million euro, or about 100 million Turkish lirası at the current exchange rates. So that's the sort of financial side. It includes, or it covers, calibration and testing laboratories, certification and inspection bodies. But I'm going to be talking mostly about the laboratories, calibration and testing laboratories, rather than the certification and inspection bodies. Around 45% of the market for conformity assessment in 2013 was for accredited services. So the accredited services were just slightly less than half of the total services offered by these organisations. And since 2013, UCAS has focused very much on the development of accreditation in the healthcare sector. That's clinical laboratories and imaging services, pathology laboratories in hospitals. Those laboratories have had their own accreditation scheme up until 2013, but it wasn't compliant with ISO 15189 in full, and the UCAS regime is a very much more rigorous accreditation. So they've put a lot of work into developing accreditation for medical laboratories. UCAS in 2013 had 180 full-time staff, and that's slightly higher now, it's about 190 now. 70% of those staff were technical, they were assessment managers, full-time assessment managers. That figure is not changed, it's roughly the same. And they had 250 contract assessors. The assessors were on short-term contracts to UCAS. Again, that figure has gone up. I think it's now just slightly less than 300. The areas that it covered, the technical areas that it covered, were electrical, physical and thermal laboratories, imaging, particularly diagnostic imaging, environmental laboratories, air, water pollution, etc., land and soil, engineering and inspection, construction materials and mechanics, food, agriculture and bioscience. Bioscience is a very broad sort of area, including some farmers. Industrial chemistry, again a very broad area, and accreditation of the certification of product, personnel and management systems, including quality management. So certification-wise, accreditation and certification-wise. And so those are the areas which in 2013 they were operating. It's still much the same now. Now, looking at the testing sector, the testing laboratory sector in the UK, and I'm afraid the data, the hard data I've got is rather old. These are the latest figures that we have, which are from 2010. The testing sector had a turnover in the UK of £6 billion, roughly, which is about just over €8 billion, and I think that is about just under 50 million Turkish lira, that's slightly less than that, I think. But the interesting thing that over half of the employment and 75% of the turnover of businesses in this area were just concentrated in 20 large global businesses. So the SGS being the biggest one of all, which I think is the biggest one in Europe actually. Intertek, Exover, these are large companies. And if we look at that in a little bit more detail, the total number of testing enterprises, if I can call them those, was just under 2,000, 1,990. And they employed together 43,000 people with a turnover, as I said, it's actually just less than 6 million, about 5.8 million pounds. Now, that comprised a very large number of very small companies. And the micro businesses, those were businesses which employed between 1 and 9 employees. You can see there were 1,575 of those. In total, they employed about 6,000 people. So roughly, on average, these companies just had 4 employees each. So that's the sort of scale they were. And they generated a turnover of £464 million. Moving up slightly bigger companies, but still small, employing between 10 and 49 people. But there were 330 of those. The total number of employees about 7,000, and their turnover was 612 million, about 50% more than the micro businesses. And the size of those was about on average 20 employees. Then we come to the medium-sized companies who employ between 50 and 249 employees. There were just 65 of those. Again, they employed in total 7,000 people, so the average size was just over 100 employees per company. And they generated £503 million turnover in total, so slightly less than the small ones. But then we come to the very large businesses who have over 250 employees, and there were just 20 of those, employing 24,000 people. So there, you can do the arithmetic yourself, that's 1,000 each. But they generated £4,239 million. So you can see that all the others didn't add up to much compared with the small number of very large companies. Now that trend, that was in 2010, and that trend has continued very strongly. There have been a lot of acquisitions made, and particularly in the calibration sector. So a lot of the small companies have been taken over by bigger ones. So we probably still only got about 20 or so large companies, but we now have fewer smaller and micro businesses since 2010. So that's what the accreditation scene in the UK looks like in terms of testing and providing. Now when we come to the economics of all that, UCAS, together with British Measurement and Testing Association, BMTA, conducted a survey, and we sampled 176 businesses out of the 1,990. This was done in 2013, and we did that with Lambert and Friends from Birkbeck College in London. And the results we came up with, or the breakdown, sorry, of the survey, as you can see, there were main activities: testing laboratories 121, which counted 69%, calibration labs 48, inspection bodies 28, certification bodies 22, manufacturing laboratories in manufacturing companies 20, and 10 other ones. Now you would have immediately worked out that those figures don't add up to 176 or 100%. And that is because many laboratories carried out more than one function. In fact, some of the bigger laboratories carried out most of them. So, but just to give you a breakdown of the sort of activities, you can see they are dominated by testing and calibration laboratories. Moving on. Now we talk about the economic benefits of accreditation for laboratories, but of course there are costs. This is the thing that I think will impact most immediately upon any laboratory which is being accredited. And the costs comprise their assessment fees, and these are the most visible things. This is what your national accreditation body charges for your accreditation. And these fees will depend upon the size and scope of accreditation, the number of tests and their complexities, and it would depend upon the number of assessors necessary to undertake the assessment and the length of time of the assessment and surveillance visits. Now that is hugely variable. Some of the larger laboratories which undertake a very broad range of complex tests, their scopes of accreditation may well run to over 100 pages, very detailed pages. So they have a very large, if you like, and complicated assessment regimes. Small laboratories may only carry out one or two tests. Their scopes may be for only 2 or 3 areas, and so they will have much smaller accreditation fees because the effort for their accreditation will be much less. And it's an interesting calculation is to work out what the percentage of turnover accreditation fees actually are, and whether this ratio is constant for large laboratories and small laboratories. I tend to think that it's not, and I think proportionally, if you look at the cost of assessment fees out of total turnover or total income, is actually higher for smaller laboratories than it is for larger ones. But that's not really tested, we haven't done a study to prove it. But that's not all. That's the most visible charge. But I mean, this is based on my own experiences is running several different laboratories which have been accredited. The costs of actually preparing for your assessment, getting all the documentation right, the quality manual organised, making sure that everything is running properly and that all your activities are being done according to the quality manual, etc., can be, in my experience, between 2 and 3 times the cost of the assessment fee. And they can be highly disruptive because while you're getting ready for your assessment visit, you can't be doing other things, you can't be doing, providing services for customers. And it leads to a loss of productive time, productive fee and time. And that is particularly greater for small laboratories where you've probably got one, it's down to 4 people, you've got one sort of preparing for the assessment visit. And of course, while they're doing that, they can't actually, as I've just said, they can't be earning their fees from customers. So that's a hidden cost, but it is actually very significant. And again, it's very variable depending on size of scope, size of organisation, etc., etc. And then lastly, you have the costs of rectifying the non-compliances which come out of your assessment or surveillance visits. Now, happily, if you're wonderful and everything's perfect, those will be very small. But in my experience, there's always something to do. And obviously, the more non-compliances you have, the greater the cost of rectifying them is going to be. So there are quite significant costs for laboratories for accreditation. And quite a number actually that think, well, is it worth it? We've got all these costs, what are the benefits of doing it? So let's look at the benefits. The top one is, I've called, or Lambert and Friends call price premium. The ability of a laboratory to charge more for its accredited services than for its non-accredited services. And this is quite interesting, the findings here. On average, laboratories could charge 8% more for their accredited services than they could for their non-accredited ones. This is in the UK. But there are very great differences between calibration labs and testing laboratories, interestingly. 57% of calibration labs charged over 10% more for accredited services. Only 6% charged the same price for their accredited services as for non-accredited. And the average extra, if you like, the premium price, the extra they could charge was 11%. So that's quite a significant premium. But when we come to testing laboratories, Only 28% of testing laboratories charged over 10% more for accredited services, and 53% charged the same as for non-accredited services. So the majority, slight majority, didn't differentiate in price between their accredited and non-accredited services. And the average premium price, the average extra they could charge, was only 6%. So there's quite a big difference between calibration and testing laboratories. And there wasn't much difference in the actual share. About 62% of testing services and 59% of calibrating were actually accredited in this case, so that was about the same. But when you ask the question, did laboratories consider accreditation important or not for their businesses, 82% rated it as highly important, and 15% rated it as medium importance, and just 3% didn't think it was important at all. And there was no difference between calibration and testing laboratories. So laboratories, despite the cost, see that accreditation is important. But interestingly, the price was not the only thing they considered important. 51% of them saw that there were real benefits, real advantages in terms of their marketing and reputation. They saw the accreditation mark, if you like, as a badge of quality and competence, and it showed them to be good laboratories, good reliable laboratories, and they were able to use that in their marketing and enhance their reputation. 19% of them said that their quality of service had actually improved because of the accreditation. The accreditation process had identified some weaknesses in their organisation, which they were able to improve. They improved their customer service, and so there were real operational and quality benefits. 16% of them said, well, we had to get accredited because our customers required it. And in the UK, there are some government services which will only buy testing or calibration from accredited organisations. So 16% said, well, we did it because our customers made us do it. 12% said we were accredited because of regulations. There are regulations which require that only accredited laboratories can perform the testing service specified. And 2%, just 2%, said that there were no other benefits. So that's what the laboratories thought the benefits of accreditation were. Now, trying to translate that all into financial figures, and here the calculation is a bit soft. There are large error margins on it, and there's some quite significant assumptions that Lambert and friends made. For a start, they made the assumption that the average turnover for the laboratories of calibration labs was £2.9 million. And they calculated that the net financial benefit for testing labs was £100 million, or that's 450 million euros roughly, or about 450 million Turkish lirası. And that averaged out at £87,400 per laboratory. So that's quite a significant extra income that has come from accreditation. And for calibration labs, interestingly enough, although there are fewer of them, they generated an extra £60 million in financial benefit, 84 million euros roughly, and the average was £174,000 per laboratory. So the financial benefit for calibration laboratories was about twice as high as it was for testing laboratories. Now, don't really understand why that is, but that's how it all worked out. But again, those figures are relatively soft. Now, finally, coming to the wider benefits of accreditation, what are the benefits for the economy as a whole? Well, the first one is the facilitation of international trade, particularly in products and commodities. These have to be tested, and the theory is that if they're tested by an accredited laboratory, then using the ILAC MLA, these results will be accepted in an importing company, importing country, and such second testing is not required, and this removes a barrier to trade, a non-tariff barrier to trade. Or at least that's the theory. but I think we all know there's plenty of instances where country A, the product or commodity, is tested by an accredited laboratory, and then country B refuses to recognise the results of that testing and requires separate testing. And it's going to be very interesting to see what the TTIP negotiations on transatlantic trade actually comes up with on that issue. But Lambert and friends said recognised there was a benefit in terms of facilitation of international trade. And we move down to the environment. Well, countries operating in the environment need to observe environmental regulations, measurement of air pollution, water pollution, etc. And the measurements of that need to be correct. Otherwise, the financial consequences of having erroneous measurements can be quite significant. So accreditation is seen as a guarantee of the reliability of measurements, and it inspires greater confidence in the measurement of pollution and effectiveness of their controls. And similar arguments apply to health. I mean, in hospital laboratories, it's very important that the measurements, the diagnostic measurements are made which are correct. If they're not, there can be very serious consequences for patients with wrong treatment. And again, accreditation is seen as a way of guaranteeing the higher quality of those measurements, greater confidence in them, and there are economic consequences for that. Similarly with food. And a product quality. The argument goes that your measurements, if you are accredited, are of a higher quality. If you can measure things better in a product, that reduces waste and eliminates failures, and that has an economic benefit in terms of the product quality. Now, I'm not an economist, I'm a chemist, and I don't even pretend to understand the economic theory behind putting values to all of that, but if you like to read the original paper, it goes in at length in some details. And again, the estimates have got wide error margins, but Lambert and friends came up with a figure of the wider benefits, and that includes actually the direct benefits to laboratories, of about £668 million. It's roughly €1 billion. So they are saying that in 2013, the UK economy as a whole benefited by about €1 billion from the accreditation activities of UCAS. And bearing in mind that UCAS had a turnover of just over £22 million, that is a very massive return on investment, if you like. But again, those figures are particularly soft. So, in conclusion, what can we say about the economic benefits? Well, I think, I hope that the study has demonstrated that accreditation has very significant and real benefits, both financial and operational, for laboratories. And it also brings significant benefits to economies as a whole in terms of trade, environment protection, health, consumer and food safety, through greater confidence in measurement and consequent reduction in risks. Thank you.